Hello everyone, I'm Kibin Alleyne and today is Tuesday, May 7th. You are now watching Open, a program that brings the Bronx and New York City straight to you. Don't forget to stay connected with us via social media at BronxNet TV. Climate change is causing devastating effects such as rising temperatures, sea levels, and severe storms. Organization Consumer Reports predicts climate change will also cause severe financial consequences in the future. In about 20 to 30 years, climate change could cost adults around $500,000 in expenses. Senior Counsel for Sustainability at Consumer Reports, Alexandra Grose, joins me to discuss the report. Alexandra, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Kevin. How are you?
I'm good. How are
Thanks for
you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Now, I'm really excited to talk about this because prior to learning a little bit more about this, I didn't know that there were actually financial consequences towards climate change. Before we talk about the personal finances and how it affects that, can we talk about, can you just give us a brief overview of how this issue is costly to the U.S. economy?
Absolutely. So today alone, the U.S. is spending about $150 billion per year in climate costs. On a global scale, we're looking at $38 trillion in economic damage by 2050. And this is largely due to, like you mentioned, heat waves, floods, droughts, extreme weather events. We're seeing damage to crops and agriculture, rising costs of food and healthcare. And not all populations are going to feel this equally. So there's a lot of variability, but we know it is going to cost everyone.
So I'm so glad we're getting the chance to talk about this because I think for many people, we just assume climate change was affecting, obviously our ecosystem and the weather, but it's so much more than that. What inspired this study to explore how climate change actually affects the cost of our everyday lives?
Yeah, so those numbers I just mentioned are huge numbers. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around numbers like in the billions and trillions when you're not dealing with that in your everyday finances. So, part of the impetus for this study was trying to boil it down to a really individual, personal level, and try to figure out what it will cost a child born in 2024 over the course of their lifetime. I just had a baby last October, and so this is very
Congratulations.
relevant for me. Thank you so much. But this is going to show what it's going to cost us and what it's going to cost him over the course of his lifetime as well.
Oh, wow. So I'm so glad that you shared that with us because now it really puts it into perspective, what this could cost, a child born, recently in the future. So as I mentioned, it could cost a child born in 2024 or 2023 at least around $500,000 throughout their lifetime. And this is due to cost of living increases and reduced earnings. Can you just expand a little bit more on that finding? Because I know when I initially saw it, I was really shocked to see that number.
Absolutely. So, CR commissioned a global consulting firm called ICF. They do studies for businesses and governments to determine what climate change will cost a child born in 2024. And they found that if we don't act swiftly, it's going to cost that child at least $500,000 over their lifetime and possibly as much as $1 million. Their costs are going to go up and their income's going to go down. All of our daily costs, like food and housing, transportation, and those expenses are going to go up around 9%. And their income is going to go down to around about 10%. So, with higher living costs and lower income to pay for those costs, you're going to see an individual impact for sure.
Now, one of the major costs predicted to increase is housing related, reaching $125,000 in extra costs. Why is this one of the most expensive categories?
Yeah, so, I think housing costs generally are always going to be taking the biggest chunk out of our pocketbooks. I know for me personally, my mortgage, my insurance, and maintaining a house is what costs me the most in my budget. So not only is it just generally the biggest chunk of your budget, but we're going to be looking at higher costs to maintain your home because of these extreme weather events. Insurance costs are going up. It's going to cost more to heat and cool your home through energy costs. So that all really adds up quickly.
Now, how will it impact the way we get and afford food and groceries? Which, when I did initially look in the report, it's actually so much bigger than just going to the supermarket. I think it goes a little bit further to even how uh, the food is even grown. Can you just expand on that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So, the extreme weather events I keep mentioning, they're going to affect farms and disrupt agriculture. They're going to reduce our access to food and impede the predictability that we have in getting those food to the grocery stores. This is all going to make everything less predictable and everything's going to be more expensive. I know, the cost of groceries is already really high right now. And, we're most likely looking at a further increase of those costs when we have these extreme weather events.
And can you expand a little bit more about, you said like on farms or the agriculture. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean the weather's changing every year. We're seeing drier weather in some areas that weren't experiencing that before, and we're seeing flooding in areas that haven't experienced that before. A lot of food that comes from California is experiencing more wildfires than ever. So all of these things add up and really are going to affect our agriculture ecosystem where we get a lot of our local organic sourced food from.
Now, I was surprised to see that healthcare was at the lowest at 5,000 in extra costs, but I'm curious to know what impact could this have in a country where thousands of people already struggle with healthcare costs and just receiving healthcare in general.
Yeah, so the $5,000 is almost certainly an underestimate. We tried to be very conservative with these numbers just to make sure, we're doing two scenarios. One's the lowest cost and one's the highest cost scenario. But it only includes estimates from heat related and respiratory illnesses. It's not including, increases in certain infectious diseases, injuries from extreme weather events. There's a lot that's not included in this estimate that in reality we're going to be dealing with. So, in the real world, for Americans already struggling to afford healthcare, any incremental increase in healthcare costs is going to really be a big burden.
Right.
Um,
And I'm so glad that you said that because climate change is also expected to affect our health in general. Just like especially people in lower income communities, they deal with a little bit, um, they face more health challenges in regard to climate change. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Absolutely. I think, low income and disadvantaged communities, communities of color are always going to face the brunt of disasters like this harder than other populations. We also are going to see, geographically, depending on where you live, you're going to be dealing with, more severe instances of, you might have your insurance rates go up. You might have it taken away altogether, depending on the flooding, fires, like I mentioned before. So geographic location, as well as your your income bracket, where you live. This is all going to have sort of a variation on how hard you how hard you have to deal with this and the challenges that you're going to face.
Now, I heard you mention this number before, but I definitely want to touch on it again because it is a huge number. Over time, ICF researchers suspect losses could reach $1 million, which is a lot of money. Why is this number expected to climb so high?
Yeah, so I think that, like I mentioned, the 500,000 is a conservative estimate, but the real world costs are likely to be much, much higher. A lot of this depends on what we do. The extent of the future of climate change is going to be affected by greenhouse gas emissions, determined by society's energy choices and behavior. So, we're looking at what our business is doing, what our government's doing, um, but also what our consumers and individuals doing. So all of these choices that we're making now is going to have a really big impact on what our children have to deal with in the future.
Now, I also, as you mentioned, it is the future. I'm curious to know how is climate change currently affecting adults and their personal finances currently?
Yeah, I think, today we are already seeing costs rise. We're already seeing insurance companies withdrawing their coverage, raising premiums. We're seeing food costs go up. I think this study particularly looks on what it's going to look like in the future. but there are things we can do today to mitigate what's going to happen later on.
And can you expand on, what we can do now, just so that in the future these costs will be significantly lower?
Yeah, I think if you can take one thing away from this, it's that we need to act now to make sure that we don't end up with the worst case scenario. We can affect the we can mitigate the effects of climate change from our choices now. But we recognize it's not only up to the individual consumer. So we're pushing for businesses and governments to step up and do the right thing. We're working on things like making sure automakers reduce emissions from cars, making appliances more efficient. But for folks who want to take steps in their personal life to reduce their climate impact and save money, Consumer Reports has a lot of resources on their website at cr.org, and steps you can take in your own home to help with these challenges and reduce these costs.
All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation. It was very interesting, and I definitely learned a lot today. So, once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
To learn more about this report, please go to their website at www.cr.org. Don't go away. We'll be back with more Open after this.